Welcome to another episode. Today we're joined by the Glacis team, and recently LI.FI announced a partnership with Glacis to accelerate the adoption of Interop token standards. And today I just want to give you guys the chance to introduce yourselves, tell us about your background. What are you guys building?
Yeah, thank you for having us. Love the show. The main thing to kind of set the framework of what we're trying to build is using a mental model that I think a lot of people will be familiar with. And there's kind of two sides to this. There's the consumers, like the mass adoption we all want, and then there's the builders in the space. And if you think about like a phone today, Web 2 internet, it just kind of works. You pick it up, you don't really understand all the technology underneath it, and you're able to take the actions that you want to take. And the reality of that is that the internet is this patchwork. Like it's this patchwork of technologies and systems that's been built up over the past couple of decades that's had to be stitched together. And in our mind, we think Web3 is not going to be any different. We're rapidly accelerating technology. We're adding all these new improvements to the stack across various levels. And it's creating a similar sort of problem where it's fracturing the user experience and the onboarding. For the Web2 internet, you don't really question how it all works. And Sam specifically has a deep background in kind of the Web 2 space.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's very similar to what I've seen at VMware many years ago. So I worked at VMware. I have a background in computer science and networking. I've seen a transition from the physical environment that people had, like data centers, into a virtualized environment where VMs are talking to VMs and there's more network traffic within VMs, and not very similar to what we think would be in Web3 space. So we're kind of building towards an environment where a lot of the abstraction of the networking would be obvious, and we're seeing a lot of that trend around account abstraction, chain abstraction, and token standard abstraction. That's what we're going to be talking about later today with the product that we'll be working on.
Yeah, and so that's from the user side. On the other side is the builders, and the reason I'm framing it is to kind of paint the pain points that we're hoping to address. And another example is I worked at LI.FI for a couple of years, and this was back in 2021, 22. And they had a huge issue because as they grew, they were kind of isolated on Ethereum mainnet. And we were seeing the emergence of Arbitrum, Optimism, and all these other EVM chains. And that was opportunity cost. They couldn't expand there. Arbitrum at one point had 1.5 million ETH that, as the head of BD, I wanted access to. And so Lido, as they grew, getting up to 20, 30 billion assets under management, their risk tolerance fell off a cliff. I still to this day think Lido is one of the most risk-averse protocols. And it makes sense. You just can't oopsie billions of dollars, Bybit, for example. And so if we're kind of looking at it from that lens, very few protocols have reached the scale of Lido or Aave. In Aave's case, they were able to custom build their whole cross-chain infrastructure in-house because they have a huge team and a lot of funding. For Lido, they're so big, they could force the large bridge providers such as Wormhole and Axler to come together and say, if you want to work with us and use our assets for bridging, you've got to do what we want. Most protocols aren't there. So then if you're not that size, you're stuck with either build custom. So if you're building a lending borrowing protocol, you're now working on bridging architecture, which is outside of your wheelhouse, or you kind of have to accept what's currently on the market. And so that paints kind of the problem that builders are having if we assume app chains and continued growth and routing across all of this. That's what Glacis is attempting to solve, is institutional routing. Because if we expect banks and real world assets and teachers' pension funds to come on chain, they're not going to allow that to be, oops, we lost your retirement. Sorry, Mr. DiGaetano, like you can't retire. It's just not acceptable. They're going to need that tooling in place, and that's what we're trying to build.
And then you guys solve this issue by actually providing one API that kind of interacts with all the different Interop protocols.
Yes.
Right. So there's this abstraction, plus you can also like customize security based on what's
So I think the number one is the feature, which is abstraction itself, right? Like to being able to easily translate across layer 0, XLR, Wormhole, Hyperlane, or any new Chainlink or any new adapters that you kind of build, like custom relayers. All of those things are composable within the architecture that we've built. But at the same time, in the networking space, outside of the Web3 space, you tend to expect some guarantees of not having always having the network on. So if one of the network is down, layer 0 is down, you automatically reroute to the next one. Some of the protocols that came to us working, they were working with a DVN on Polygon DVN on layer 0, and it was slow. So they're like, can we set up a timeout where we can default to a different DVN after this timeout happens? So yeah, those kind of things are possible programmatically. Oh, by the way, if layer 0 upgrades from layer version 1 to version 2, now you don't have to re-upgrade everything else because we maintain that upgradability, etc. Right? So a lot of the networking features that become cumbersome for small projects become very easy with Glacis in a single API.
Got it. And then where it gets interesting for LI.FI is that when you actually do this on a Interop token standard level, because we deal with liquidity, and that's where like it's very interesting for us. And I'll let like Dom kind of give us more context on this partnership.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think like we can all think about LI.FI mostly as a liquidity aggregator, and as you guys said as well, an institutional liquidity aggregator that works with a lot of enterprise clients and gives them kind of like the same uptime guarantees of like, instead of working with one bridge or one swap, if any of them are down, we just reroute the liquidity to the next best source. You can customize your entire stack. So I think the Glacis product and the LI.FI product are very similar in the way that they are designed on different parts of the stack, where one deals with like bridges and liquidity directly, and the other one deals with the underlying verification layer, right? So this is where we thought it could be very interesting for us to work with Glacis, because we obviously don't have really the intention of like reinventing the wheel here and rebuilding this whole thing. But we are obviously, we think aggregation is generally the way to go. And in any type of network theory, aggregation is always the thing that wins in the end. So yeah, from there, we kind of started talking to each other. And for us, we were facing this problem of having all these different token standards, fragmentation across layer 0, wormhole, Chainlink token standards, XERC20, as you guys said, custom tokens that some of the providers have built. And those were not available in our routing because we would have had to kind of rebuild what you guys built and, aggregate all of them individually, which isn't, something that our engineers would be very happy about.
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, the Glacis team and me and Philip as well met up last year, I guess like in summertime roughly.
Yep.
And we started having this conversation and started talking about potentially building this product. And we saw very soon that it made sense. And then in June as well, was seeing a lot more adoption in these interchain tokens and the volume numbers. And if we're looking at them today, we were just looking at them earlier. I think OFTs alone did $250 million in volume today. Today alone. So yeah, it's very timely. We're very happy that we can launch this soon. And we think this will unlock a large part of liquidity aggregation within our routing that we haven't had access to yet.
Yeah, I think the timely piece is very correct, because we were talking to a bunch of protocols on the way last year. We built out this resilient thing. Unfortunately, people have very short memory in this space. and what we have found is people just forget about all the bridge hacks, the single bridge hacks and stuff like that. And they just want to be on chain on day one for whatever the points lasagna that we have kind of created, right? So we did feel that there was resistance towards that, but there is still technology that we had built, and it was kind of built for a future that is coming, just not today. Mm-hmm. But what is the maximum use case for our product today? And obviously, talking to him, we actually pitched you guys about the original product, and you're like, yeah, that's actually really neat. But oh, by the way, this is actually a burning problem right now, which is like in the last 6 months, OFTs kind of captured a market of its own. NTT did this own thing, and then Hyperlane is coming up with its own token. So it kind of created islands on purpose. We understand why, like it's beneficial to these individual providers, but it also created a bigger problem for people like LI.FI, and people like other aggregators in the space in general. So we saw that a good opportunity, and we were able to kind of capture the momentum.
I want to talk about that point of adoption, right? Like, because today we're seeing multiple different providers have their own standard. Yep. And that's why for someone like LI.FI, it's 10 times more work, because not only is there like a single standard, there are also different implementations of each standard and each token.
Oh,
right?
every OFT can be different based on the parameters.
So maybe you can like shed some light on how complicated that is and why it makes sense to have one team that kind of just specializes in this part of the stack.
Yes. So we were able to add very quickly, like 30 plus tokens, just because we already had the expertise and the tech to work on this problem. But even then, the amount of testing, the amount of different call data that is required for facets that we are built for LI.F.I is still very, very large for a project like LI.F.I to be able to integrate, because the OFT contracts by default, which is majority of the volume, right? We're not talking about hydras, we're not talking about the cookie cutter projects. If you're a serious project and you're launching a big token on layer 0, you would customize that OFT contract to your parameters. And every customization requires a different connection point for people like LI.F.I as well as teams like us. So we were able to kind of map this out, and we think over time, there will be economies of scale in this project, but at the moment, and we have achieved that with our project. We think we can add like 5 to 10 tokens per week now since the beginning, but the first 6 months were definitely a lot of grunt work.
And just to paint, again, an example of this is some of these OFTs, if you don't pay attention to the parameters, you assume, oh, it's an OFT. And this is not any dunking on layer 0. Everyone has different issues, but like you'd assume, okay, it's an OFT. It should be everywhere layer 0 is. But some of these projects, we're finding this out, like in build mode, you can't go to base with that OFT. They haven't turned on that parameter. So if you tried to just blindly use it through LI.F.I or Jumper, it just kind of errors out. So there's all these nuances that you're working through. And again, I always try to bring it back up to the consumer level. Right now, in the state of the world, is you either know where you're going. So, oh, it's an OFT, I should probably go over to Stargate. Or you just eat a huge amount of slippage on fees because you're like, oh, well, okay, let's swap into a transport token, usually a stable coin, go over and then swap back into the thing I actually want. And that is a miserable user experience.
And also we cannot, like, we are very, we're very locked into our own industry, and then we are very locked into a subcategory of our own industry. So we know these things exist, right? But we cannot expect neither the end user nor the user on the B2B side to have to know about all these things, right?
Sure.
And let's maybe also frame the complexity of the problem here. You already said one problem is just quantity of tokens, right? We know that everybody is launching tokens. There's more and more tokens. They all want to go to multiple, like all of them want to be at least on 3 chains, right? Like there's almost no individual token that just wants to be on one chain. So the number of tokens will be insurmountably large. But then also, if we go into the actual verification layers, right, we can go all the way from, hey, this is the most centralized piece of thing, like what kind of CCTP is, in a sense, is Circle saying, thumbs up, this transaction is good, to the message passing protocols of today. Now we have all these proof systems coming up. We have optimistic systems. We can use entire chains to do this verification. So the number of different verification mechanisms is expanding very fast. And then you have now autoroller clusters and stuff like that building their own verification layers on top of that. So very soon we're going to see 20 to 30 different variations of like tokens being basically verified for the minting and burning across these different chains. So this problem will be accelerating.
Yep.
So our goal was to build something that can scale. And that's a whole different that's a whole different company in itself, or like a whole different team that just needs to work on that. And that's why we decided to not tackle that problem ourselves for now, at least.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's where we're really value aligned, is we're both trying to build in an agnostic Swiss way, to say, where we're trying not to take sides on any one standard or piece of technology. We're not going to claim to know exactly how it's going to shake out. Is a TCP/IP type standard going to come out, or is it going to be like telecoms where 3 to 4 are winning the market? But we want to build in a way that's kind of naturally compatible. And then the fact that you guys want to focus on the liquidity layer is amazing, because we are desperately trying to avoid that. Same with the data transport validation. That's already kind of been designed and worked on. So we're trying to stay effectively in our lane. Management.
But like, did you guys foresee this type of adoption for standards? Because like, let's say originally you were trying to build this abstraction tool for developers, right? But now we're trying to focus on the token standard part of things, where you can just mint and burn a token. And that's where it's exciting for LI.F.I to add these tokens to our routing. But did you foresee that this is where the adoption would come?
To be very clear, we have not abandoned our developer narrative. We do still very much think that the market will converge towards more, not just token transfers. And we have to believe that the privacy stuff and the data is coming online, and there's ability that there's app chains with their own valuable
that's
data.
Where the ecosystem is today, right? Like value transfer is where all of the action is happening in the cross-chain world. But my general, I did not foresee this happening.
Not 6 months ago, no, for sure
exactly.
not.
The rate of adoption is just crazy.
was all wrapped assets everywhere,
Mhm.
right? And that was a nightmare. And then all of a sudden we have like, oh yeah, we have this interchain tokens, but then now everybody just realized that you can just lock people into your ecosystem, so to say, and create this islands. But I think that created a new opportunity. So we timed it really, really well in terms of like, I think I'll give credit to Dom in terms of like really pushing through on last year's August timeframe, because we were still on the fence, but Dom was very clear about that. So I do definitely.
Yeah, I think the thing that caught me the most off guard is because we've only been building for a little over a year and a half, working actively on Glacis. But last year, back at this time, the standards wars really hadn't taken off. So we were thinking a truly agnostic standard. I mean, we originally were supporting hexaERC 20. We thought that was going to be the thing. We knew there might be some programmatic standards. We just didn't expect it to accelerate as fast. But for the issuers and the builders, it makes sense. You don't have to worry about liquidity pools. You get instant, really quick settlement. You can transport with no slippage, and you can just deploy a token that's going to be pretty good out of the box. You don't have to worry too much about all the nuance.
But like, are you surprised by the fact that it's the top institutions in the world who are using these? Because let's say it's sort of still experimental or early, but the names that are adopting these standards are literally your PayPal, Tether, right? Like some of the biggest names in the world. So did you actually think that we'll get to that point so quickly?
No, I think they're, I mean, credit where credit's due. Layer Zero and Wormhole's BD teams are just monsters in terms of like being able to get such good brands on chain. And it's good for the ecosystem in general, right? Like, because we are in the interop space, right? Like, we don't really, I mean, we want the ecosystem to win, not like individual winners. And hence, it's kind of beneficial to the overall ecosystem that there is resilient, large brands, trusting cross-chain networks, etc. Because then we can build the Web3 of the future, right? Like, so, yeah, of course, we did not expect that, but they're doing a great job, and kudos to them on that front, for sure.
Yeah, and maybe we can also frame it here for the user, what we think this experience will look like and why it is happening, right? So what we've been seeing this year or last year is kind of like, I guess, the year of like stable coins in some way. All kinds of flavors becoming very easy to create these on chain. And more institutions want to have their own versions, own flavors of these. And I think what specifically the fintechs of this world have realized is that they can, in a globalized world where these corporations operate in like almost every country, almost every jurisdiction, it's so much more simple for them to move these assets via blockchains, right? And also for the people who may be not familiar with that, right? A lot of these things in fintechs, they have 60 bips, 80 bips, 100 bips, maybe 2% even fees. And everybody thinks these people must be making so much money, but they're not, because they're in StepTime paying all these fees to the 7 intermediaries that sit between them and getting their money where they want it, right? Whereas on a blockchain, once the transaction is there, they go from one way directly to the other. They pay a minimal fee or a minimal amount of bips to transfer or swap their assets. And so the margins that they can make from moving these assets around, they're so much bigger. So this will take in all the fintechs, and that will probably another 10x, another 100x even maybe the stablecoin transfers. And once we get to there, this problem, will probably do another 100x.
Yeah.
I mean, tokenization was always crypto's like biggest addressable market, right? And it's honestly very surprising for me that Interop protocols are at the core of this tokenization movement. And it's actually like teams like Wormhole, Layer Zero going out of our bubble and getting all of those institutions into crypto, right? So I never expected Interop to play a crucial role, even at the asset issuance level, which is honestly like, if you can mint and burn an asset on different chains, there's no better way to actually move funds around across chains.
Yeah. You have to work with and that's where the latency is there, right? There's still latency, and I think the announcement that you guys made on LI.FI 2.0 with Catalyst guys and Pioneer guys, I think it's also very timely, because the second problem of this interop is the latency part. And with these 3 products, the LI.F product, the Catalyst, and Pioneer, it's like a package for any intent protocol to kind of plug and play, right? Like, so you have the custom relayer, you have the fast the solvers, as well as the low slippage environment. So we definitely should be marching towards that future, and I think it's timely to look around this.
So what does like the next 6 month look like for you guys?
I think, go ahead.
No, the biggest thing is getting live on on production with this thing, and then adding as many tokens if there's new standards. I think a big area of focus for us, you touched on. I love the term chain clusters. I hadn't heard that until yesterday, and it's like definitely stuck in. But for those that don't know, that's the ZK elastic chains, OP superchain, Arbitrum, or Orbit chains. They're all figuring out how do we make this out of the box, or RAS providers roll up as a service. Like, how do we allow people to spin up their app chain really quickly, but then still be highly interoperable and atomic with everyone else on our platform? And I think that's going to be a big area of focus. One of the previous startups I was at was called Spruce ID. And during Consensus, we did a lot of digital identity work, and then we spun that out into Spruce ID. And I feel it's very similar, where getting teams to work on standards in an open way is painfully slow because everyone has an opinion on everything. But it's also the most important work to make sure we don't continue fracturing and building these kind of isolated islands. For some businesses, the more islands you have, the better it is, because it's intentionally difficult to get somewhere so you can charge a premium. But for the user experience, again, the end consumers of all of this, that's not how you get adoption. It just has to work. It has to be cheap. It has to be fast. And so we're going to be spending a lot of time, at least for my side, is on those chain cluster groups and really like working with them to make sure they're thinking, I know you want to be your own little ecosystem, but there's trillions and billions of dollars outside that want to enter and exit. So we'll be doing a lot of standard work.
I think like there's still, I had some conversations yesterday. There's many people still questioning, first of all, like, what is blockchains and crypto actually for? And like, why are we building all of this?
Why are we
Obviously,
here?
like the meme coin mania, all of this stuff, it kind of like gets people in the wrong direction. But at the end of the day, we are really close to creating the new backend for the financials of this world. But that means for the accounting of the entire world, in essence, right? Because like everything is financials. Every institution has financials, and the more and more we can suck that on chain. We already know that things on chain are much simpler, but you need to get the people to be there. And once they're there, then it becomes easy to plug and play other things. And I think what we always try to do is have these pockets of adoption of like this one thing, but that then wasn't interoperable enough with other things that you could actually really do anything with it, right? Like back at NFTs, like people try to do all these things, but there was so much missing for it to make it more than speculation. I think now we're at a much, much more advanced stage where if we can bring these things on chain, there's so much that can be done with them. Yeah. The data, the value, the security of those things.
So agree 100%. I think to come back to that question of what's 6 months, I think from product perspective, we have two bets outside of the LI.FI Airlift product. One is evaluating how the DVN marketplace can evolve. We think that every single layer 0 XLR or every single transport layer has some version of this marketplace existing, where it could be a very new way of like having utility for your token to verify your own messages, but then it creates like additional problem of like if your token value changes, economic value is kind of dependent on it. How do you manage that security or like which DVNs to go? It's a very similar problem to where we have tried to solve it, which transport layer to kind of go. So if that market evolves and layer 0 is like an evident player in that space, it's very nascent at the moment. So we're observing that. So that's one bet. We're working with a couple of teams there, a couple of teams on like bridge aggregation piece. We just can't disclose just yet, but they're pretty big names around that. And that is also progressing. And on the back end side, we're storing every single route, which is basically being able to predict things on the long run on Web 2 space. Majority of the cross-chain or like the network behavior is actually used for machine learning based security analysis. So like a VM talks to another VM on Mondays and Fridays. All of a sudden on Tuesdays, it's about to send X amount of money. You want to flag that, or you want to create an institutional policy. It says, I require 4 checks or like automatically use multiple routes, etc. Right? Like, so all of that is possible when you have large sums of data of routing, of like what people are intending, what people are asking. And I think the Airlift product gives us that data set. We look to build towards that machine learning based networking security as well. So these are a couple of the angles that we think are interesting.
Makes sense. Even for the DVN market, like I think the messaging volume has to go up pretty
drastic.
much pretty high.
Right now, it's very
Yeah.
default layer 0 DBN because it's easy button.
But it's a good thing, to be honest, because like the message volume is definitely progressing towards like up and to the right. But we do need like more secure DVNs so
Yes.
that the asset issuers have an option. Like today, there are only 5 or 6 options. Like there was this restaking DVN that is still not like live. There are multiple DVNs in the works, but nothing beyond the defaults and multisigs that actually secures something with high guarantees. So it's nice to see that teams are still building towards that. And there's, like you said, every Interop team has that modular verification marketplace where this type of tech can fit in.
Yeah.
And it'll be good because once it's live, then it can also get battle tested. Because the joy of this space that we're working in is it's open source and everyone can look for weaknesses at every moment. And again, bringing it back to Lido is Lido would not work with projects if they hadn't been battle tested for a while, meaning either TVL users, data, some reason to show like you're not just a science experiment. And I think institutions are going to be the same. Hey, we just built this thing. It's never been used. Would you like to use it? They're probably not going to go that way.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But do you think like institutions would be interested in running some of their own infrastructure for this?
Oh, absolutely. It'll come down to at least my time. Like I worked at JP Morgan for a little while and it was always, can we build it for cheaper than we're paying for all the SaaS seats that we have in house? And at some point, if the calculus changes, but I would see a lot of the financial institutions want to run, for example, staking infrastructure. Why not grab some extra bips and do whatever you're going to do with it?
Also legal reasons, probably.
Sure. Yeah. There's also the legal reasons. Don't let it mix with terrorism groups and all that. But I think it's the same thing for DVNs. Like the work Athena's doing, I think is clever because you get to become the bridger of last resort for your protocol.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of an ultimate security guarantee. At least ideally, you're not going to rug yourself.
Okay. So Dom, like from a product perspective at LI.FI, what's the biggest unlock that we can expect from this integration?
Yes, I think for us it's mostly about serving a new set of clients, so to speak, because obviously we were selling our products to certain clients, but they were already issuers of such tokens, right? And then you tell them like, hey, here's like, here's the API, and you can get all the on-chain liquidity out of that one API, which is kind of like our credo. And then they will be like, yeah, but what about my token, right? So that's where your sales pitch kind of like stops. If you cannot support their own asset, like why would they use us, right? Maybe if there's no better alternative, they would still use us, but the pitch has now become much harder. This basically removes that barrier there, and it allows us to add either the stablecoins or the native tokens of any project that we're working with, and that makes it much easier for us to basically get integrated with more DeFi protocols, with more stablecoin providers, etc. And then I think on top of that, as we discussed earlier, that stablecoin market is growing. And that means that kind of all the providers that sit basically on the edge of that world, between the real world and the on-chain world, they need to figure out the on-chain routing of these assets, and they need to figure out how to move these assets around and do it in a secure way and do it with the right data. And, maybe they want to charge fees on this. And so I think for them, it's going to come down to just like, as you said, do we build this ourselves or do we, use this as a service? And as all of these institutions see this not as part of their core business, I think a lot of them will start using us for that. Maybe in the future, at some point in time, they're going to want to try to build something themselves. But I think for now, we're far away from that. So I think the main two unlocks here are, let's maybe use the term brokers of any sort, and any protocol that has their own assets issued and wants to have the full coverage for those assets for all of their users.
Yeah, I think like in general, the bridging Interop ecosystem is very focused and very vocal about like intents. But the meat of the volume is actually happening in these Interop token standards. So I feel like not a lot of people are paying attention to this, but there's so much going on in this like little Interop standard bubble that we can finally now actually offer through our routers.
And that's size, right? A solver can fill any small order, but not size, right?
Yeah. I was going to say the settlement, and like I'm kind of excited to see for you how the burn mint will be used for larger order settlements. So whether that's a liquid fund on chain that needs to move $10 million that normally would have slippage or other issues, or to your point about intents and solver inventory management. Now I can handle the small orders, $50,000, $1,000, and then I can do 6-figure transfers. And it takes 15 minutes. It's not a big deal. There's no slippage. Like that's a huge benefit for kind of the large inventory providers.
Yes, and maybe maybe Sam, you can allude to that a little bit of fee structures of this product, right? We build it in a way that is very flexible. So for any big partner that wants to approach us on working with us on this, we can figure out a structure that makes sense for their business model.
Oh yeah, we can provide volume discounts. I mean, you guys can work with us to provide volume discounts. There is flexibility either. So off the gate, we're going to be still fraction of the cost of whatever is available. Because if you really look at it, it's not simply cross-chain transfers on 1inch or LI.FI or one of these cross-chain providers. It's really the people that go to DEXs and then they take a transport token, USDC or USDT, to go across chain and then get the token that they really want. WBTC, for example, a lot of volume in that space. We can do that zero slippage across with a very small fee with LI.FI, and that could allow for large volumes to kind of trickle in instead of having to do multi-step process. So yeah, I think the overall we think that not just the OFT market is hiding a lot of this under the cover, but also USDC and USDT market is like somewhat OFT market that is like hidden by people just not having options to go cross-chain.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of option there.
And maybe for all of our users using Jumper.exchange is like for the individual user, the retail user, or all of us are on-chain users ourselves. Like for them, it's even more complicated to go to this fragmentation. So for all of these users, the way they should think about it is they know LI.FI keeps adding one bridge after the other. This is kind of us adding like 10 bridges at the same time that they get out of the box.
Think more than that, because like literally every token implementation.
Yes, if you want to do it like that, every token is its own bridge. So we're adding, like, as you said, 30 bridges at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so this is going to be a big part of LI.FI 2.0 and also improves our routing greatly, because you can now support like literally any size mint and burn, and then you can do like cool things like multi-hopping. You can support solvers better. So I think overall it'll be a big part of like how our product evolves in the future, and I'm super excited to actually be working with you guys on this.
Well, taking it back to the very beginning of your phone not knowing, it's a clear step towards the end consumer not having to be like, well,
is this an
what is the token type? Okay, what bridge am I going to use? Which wallet am I in? Am I going to go to this DEX or that DEX? Like 99% of the world just are not going to want to deal with that. So moving towards something that removes that is
it's beneficial.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is like once upon a time I was in Paris and a friend of mine was asking me what I do for work and like how that makes any difference. So I went to the shop and I tapped my Apple Pay card to get that croissant. And then I explained to them what happens in the back end of that transfer in France from my German bank account, like how the money needs to be credited there and how many people are sitting in between that while you just magically tap your card, right? I think very few people have the awareness of the complexity that is abstracted from them.
Of course. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, any last comments? Or like, I think we have enough information for everyone to like look forward to Glacis going live on LI.FI.
I think we're very excited to be part of the LI.FI 2.0 ecosystem. Wondering, actually, I lost chain of thought. We should end this for sure.
I think the main thing for us as a call to action would be, if you have an asset and you want your asset to be supported by a routing, come approach us, and we will make sure that your asset will become available in LI.FI, which means in all of our B2B partners as well as on Jumper.
Here's the call to action. Instead of going to a DEX, try Jumper first and see the rates. See the rates. If they're not competitive, go do your usual DEX swaps. But if you come to Jumper, you get a good rate. You have a better routing.
Just use Jumper.
Yeah.
Just make the jump.
Awesome. You can wrap it up.
Sure.
What a good wrap up.
So it's just gonna keep running. So
yeah.
Thank you guys. This is great.
That's great.